Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega. And in this episode, we're going to talk about blame and how the concept of blame would change in the future as more people understand that nobody is fundamentally to blame. I mean, nobody has a free will. No one's the author of their own thoughts, desires, and actions. So, what form of blame, if any, do you think will exist in the future?
Okay, I think before we start, we want to kind of like define blame because it has a couple of definitions. Sometimes blame simply means that you identify someone as the agent or person who did something wrong without actually um, kind of like it being negative, without any kind of judgment. That's one definition. But I think when most people say blame, if we blame someone for something, we're saying, well, they did it of their free will, and if it's something that they did wrong, they kind of like maybe deserve to be punished, or that they deserve to suffer, or that it has a pejorative sense. So that's the sense of blame that we're going to deal with. Um, the other thing we want to kind of like just explore just quickly is like some people like Harris. I think a few people, even though they get that we don't have a free will, even though they get that this is major, they're not very optimistic in terms of how long it'll take our world to overcome this free will belief. My view is like considering the internet, considering the quickening rate of information exchange because of the internet, and all these different ways of communicating that we have now. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, within, let's say, the next 20 years, or even like tops maybe the next 30 years, the world comes to understand that we don't have free will. So, like, all right, so in that world, um, basically, I think what this podcast is about is that without the belief in free will, no one will have any reason, any logical reason to quote unquote blame anyone for anything.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, like you mentioned, there's those two different meanings that people mean by blame, and they're very different. And what's difficult about it is that I think, different words need to be used for different concepts, and things get a little bit muddled up because you have multiple people using the same word meaning different things. So we could say, for example, that a tornado, let's say that we saw a tornado blow a house down. For example, we could pragmatically blame the tornado and say, well, the tornado was the recent cause of that house being destroyed. But we don't seek revenge on that tornado. We don't say, oh, well, that tornado deserves to go to hell, and you know what I mean. So there, I think that's what we're getting at, is we're getting at the idea of realizing, yeah, here's the thing that happened, but we no longer feel that weird emotional reaction.
Yes, and like this is interesting because basically, you know, even though like all right, so let's say nobody believes in free will, somebody does something, nobody's going to quote unquote blame the person the way we blame today, because we might even have like we'll change the maybe the term we use to from blame to identify. We identify that the person did what they did. And here's the thing. So like there's a bit of a nuance here, because like on the one hand, we're not going to fundamentally blame the person, but let's say the person did something wrong. It's not like we're not going to do anything. So for example, like, if a person does something wrong under the free will paradigm, we might both, let's say the person didn't know it was wrong, so we have to kind of like explain to the person, let's say it's a young child or something, why it was wrong and all. But sometimes, very often, well, at least often enough under this free will belief, as you were saying, emotions become involved. We'll become angry at the person while we're kind of like trying to teach them the right thing. Whereas, like when everybody gets that nobody has a free will, those negative emotions in the process of like correcting people's behavior simply won't exist. There won't be we behave that way now because we believe it's logical. It's a logical consequence of our belief that people have free will, that they deserve to be you know to feel our anger. But again, like that's why overcoming this belief in free will is going to create such an amazing world, a world without blame and without anger. I mean, at least anger at each other.
Yeah, and here's what's interesting about it is now certainly I understand why people get very emotional about, sensitive topics like murder, murder and rape and lying and stealing. People get really, really upset when certain things are done to them that they don't like or to somebody else that they know. So what's interesting is that if we are feeling the emotions about the event that happened, but not necessarily transferring those emotions to the person, realizing that yes, they may need to be corrected, and yes, we need to protect ourselves from them. So if they're likely to do something again, but I think it's about making sure that our emotions are directed at the right thing.
Yeah, Chandler, that's an excellent point. So, you're right, because we will fully understand that that person, whoever did whatever they did, was not fundamentally responsible, does not have a free will. There's absolutely no logical reasons to become angry with him, but, our mind will say, well, something. If it's a theist, they'll say, well, God. I mean, something caused this person to do that, and we might either just be angry that it happened, that this person was caused to do something wrong, maybe that kind of like harmed us in some way, or we will be angry at whatever we identify as fundamentally responsible for causing this person to do that. But that's the point. So like all of a sudden our anger is directed more accurately to the cause of what happened, rather than being completely mistakenly directed at somebody who had absolutely no control over what happened.
Yeah, and this is very important because here's what I think happens is certain things people over time become blind to because once they become so commonly accepted, you know, um, for example, it used to be very common, slavery, having the black people be slaves and them being beaten and killed and being sold as property. And that used to be such a normal thing for everyone that nobody even considered it. And so naturally those people who were doing it, they didn't feel that it was wrong. They didn't feel emotionally that it was wrong. Now the people who were having the stuff done to them, yeah, of course they felt like it was wrong. But isn't it interesting how people's emotional reactions to things, it requires it requires two things. Like there's two different things. Like there's one thing realizing, well, this is wrong, I wouldn't want this done to me, or this is the right thing to do, this feeling of right and wrong, which is separate from the belief that people get to choose what set of morals that they've inherited, both genetically and environmentally.
Right. And again, like, all right, with the emotion of anger, in psychology, it's defined as a reaction against a perceived injustice, something like that's unfair, that's wrong has happened, and that's why we become angry. And so, yeah, so like as we overcome our belief in free will, we will recondition ourselves, just like we reconditioned ourselves to from thinking, for example, like a lot of people in the past, felt that men were naturally superior to women. Okay, now in today's world, I think there's more women here in the United States in med school and law school than the men. I think women are now outperforming men in math. So like, so we change we change our information, and as the information changes, our emotional reactions or our judgments and opinions change. So with this, it's going to be the same. So like, and it may take a generation. It may take, because like it's one thing to kind of like know that nobody has a free will. It's another thing to kind of like know it so well that you're kind of like, basing your reactions on this knowledge kind of like intuitively or instinctively without any actually kind of effort. But Chandler, then what happens is like, we're gonna, so like basically things go wrong in our world, at least in terms of human behavior. And now we blame ourselves and each other. So like the world overcomes belief in free will. And there's going to be the next tendency is going to be to want to blame the universe or God or whatever we want to call it. But I can foresee that even that kind of blame might be eventually deemed irrational. And we've talked about this before. This is the idea of like, let's say we wanted to blame the creator of the universe, or the universe that created itself, however we want to like phrase it, for causing, somebody to do something wrong. Well, the problem with that is like, we would have to like, in order to blame the universe or God for something like that, we would have to like conclude that at a certain point, at a certain time, God or the universe decided, even of their free will, even that this was going to happen. The problem with that is that this chain of cause and effect, that, as far as we know scientifically, goes back to the Big Bang, logically keeps going back, and we never reach a point at which we can say, well, the universe decided at this point to make this happen. So I mean, the advantage of that may be that, ultimately we may become angry that something happened, but then like be spared, blaming anything or anyone for it, because again, like if this chain of cause and effect goes back, I mean, like, maybe theoretically, abstractly, one can still blame the universe for making it happen. It's a bit harder, but we might actually be able to reach a point where we're not blaming anything for anyone or anything for anything.
Yeah, see, I think the problem with blaming anything, blaming God, the universe, or whatever, yeah, the problem is that it always assumes that there was genuinely a freely willed decision, that there was genuinely a choice of something. And I think that I think that, due to either causality or even a causality, as we've talked about before, you know, either way, there's no agency. There's no way of saying that anything is up to something or someone. So, for the very same reason that we can't have a free will, God or the universe or the ooze from which everything evolved from, or whatever you call it, couldn't have had a choice either.
Yeah, and ultimately at a certain point, it kind of like does defy logic. I mean, like, in other words, like we can like logically keep going back before the Big Bang and, go back eternally. But, when we think about that, that's like, multiply a Google by a Google times, and a Google times that and all. I mean, like, we're accustomed to like seeing this universe as 14 point, almost 4 billion years old, 14.37 billion years old, whatever. But like we're talking about trillions and quadrillions and zillions of billions and trillions of years going back. So like they're part of us, just can't fathom that the universe has always, I guess, existed. I mean, like I'm not sure we can even say that with complete certainty, because this whole concept, like, we ask ourselves, well, if it always existed, I mean, how could that be? Everything that we're pretty much aware of, except the universe in its totality, seem to have had a beginning. So why would the universe be different? But so yeah, so it gets surreal at a certain point. But again, the thing is that, like, as we overcome our free will belief, we can no longer even attribute free will to the universe or to whatever is making things happen, because, as you were saying, because of causality. The causality would apply to whatever is making whatever made whatever happen.
Yeah, and so I mean, it does blow your mind, however you look at it. But yeah, basically, when we go that far, we're going into stuff that's beyond the ability of humans to observe or know. But we can just know logically that something can either be it can be in order to be free, it would have to be acausal in order to be free from prior causes that determine it. And to be willed, it would have to be caused. It would have to be caused by the desires of some type of conscious living thing with desires. So there's a very conflict, the idea of freedom with something being desired.
Yeah, and what a lot of free will believers, don't realize, we've mentioned this before, that acausality doesn't help free will, because free will, very directly suggests that we agents are causing something of our free will. So, like, when you posit that our decisions are uncaused, all of a sudden, you can't have a free will decision that's uncaused, because, like, the free will demands the causality that makes it impossible. Yep.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it is that in order to for something to even make sense, in order for us to even like in a sense, causality is assumed in that moment when we're trying to blame someone. When we're saying that this person is the cause of something, well, obviously we're believing them to be the cause and not some mysterious acausal dice that's truly random.
That's very true, Chandler. So some people who want to try to invoke quantum mechanics or probabilities and stuff, if they're if they're using and ascribing free will to someone, if they're using causality to do that, then they, even though they may not realize it, they're certainly, they're certainly understanding that what's happening is they're not understanding causality completely enough. What happens is, like, they say, yes, this person caused it, and they say out of their own free will, when they don't realize that, well, no, wait, the person caused it because something caused them to cause it, and something caused whatever caused them to cause it. So they just are, they don't take that chain of cause and effect back before the person was born, before the causal chain would show how absolutely, the things that happened that were in no way up to the person ultimately resulted in what the person did.
Yeah, and I think their emotional reactions to situations is what keeps them from following that chain and coming to that same conclusion that we have.
Yeah, I mean, well, Chandler, I think one thing we have to address, for example, like with slavery and the way people view women and viewed women, even like with evolution, I think 50% of Americans believe, that we did not evolve, that, there was an Adam and Eve and all that. So the idea is that, like, yes, um, these emotions will come into play, and but it's going to take time. It's going to take time for people to kind of like to get that 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 to be reconditioned. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, people are conditioned to believe in free will, just like we were conditioned to believe that slavery was all right and all these things. So it takes time to recondition ourselves. But again, like, getting back to that point earlier, I don't think it would take, once the world gets that nobody has a free will, which I believe would be like the most amazing discovery, far more amazing than evolution, far more amazing than E equals MC squared and all. Once, it's out there and people really get it, I can't see it, I can't see more than, let's say, 10 or 20 years going by until like people are actually, very comfortably, automatically, behaving under this new paradigm, under this new understanding of our reality.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, George, because what's bizarre is when somebody compliments me, or says that I'm a nice guy, or my mom says she's proud of me, I'm a good boy, or something like that. You know, like I don't say anything, but in my head I'm thinking, well, it wasn't up to me. you know, it's kind of funny. But yeah, what's interesting is, yeah, I mean, we can still, like, for example, we can still have a system. We can tell people that they're good in some way, that they're doing good at something, and there's still better or worse things, but in the end we realize that it wasn't up to us, and that's what's interesting about it.
Yeah, and getting back to the blame thing, because now we could deal with, for example, praise. Because like, in a certain sense, if nobody has the free will, praise doesn't really make sense either. But the difference between praise and blame, to a certain extent, is that like we're hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and we want the same for other people. So like, somebody, let's say the world, gets, nobody has a free will, somebody does something good, you know somebody saying to that person, "Hey, that's great that you did that." I think both will understand that it was fated, but still, we like to kind of like we enjoy having been fated to do good, and we enjoy kind of like expressing that to each other and reminding ourselves about that. And incidentally, I guess going back to the blame thing, so like, fine, we won't blame a person for doing something wrong, but in a no free will world, reward and punishment will still be in effect. Although, Mitch, one of our hosts, is, I think, correctly proposing that in the future we're going to be doing much, much more rewarding and, far, far less punishing. But to the extent that, in other words, like, so we might actually kind of like, I, yeah, I don't know if being angry is the same way. In other words, like with the young child, let's say the world understands nobody has free will, but the young child does something wrong, and an adult might kind of like feign an angry expression at them to kind of like get them to understand that what they did was wrong. Even though the adult knows that they didn't have free will, just because, like, again, like some people believe that if we get rid of free will, we're getting rid of morality, we're getting rid of rule and law, of law, and all that. And I think we have to like just kind of like ease people's minds and explain to them, no, we still, because we don't have a free will, we respond to reward and punishment. So we're going to continue to reward and punish ourselves and each other because it molds our behavior.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thought, George, is that like I think reward is more effective than punishment, because when you think about it, if people are punished for doing something wrong, then it will just discourage them from even trying to do it right, if you know what I mean. Like, let's say, for example, that people, like, let's say you're in school and kids make fun of you because you're not good at some kind of sport or something like that. And so I think what happens is people, because of fear of failure and being blamed for failure, it kind of discourages them from even trying. So they're like, why do anything? Because I'll get blamed. So, in a sense, it actually makes more sense to have rewards and incentives for people to do good at something, but not necessarily have punishments, because punishments just get everybody discouraged and sort of fatalistic.
Yeah, and I think punishments also get people angry because here's something I think every human being on the planet has experienced. We were like really, really young, whether we were 1 year old or 2 years old. There was a point where we're experiencing our parents, yelling at us or being angry at us for something, and we have absolutely no idea what we did. Because at that age, we don't know right from wrong. So yeah, that's another thing. Like when to the extent that people, have, I think we all may have an instinctive, intuitive sense even that we don't have a free will. That what we did that was quote unquote wrong really wasn't up to us. And I think young kids probably have that much more powerfully than we do because they get they very clearly get, hey, I how am I supposed to know that I'm not supposed to do this versus that or whatever. So again, yeah, I agree with you. Just like focusing on reward, and the other reason why reward is so much wiser than punishment is because we're not hardwired to seek pain and avoid pleasure. We're hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So just based on that, it makes sense that our general trend is toward, pleasure. And so like that coincides so much better with reward than punishment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we will tend to remember the pleasure more than we will the pain because, the pain's unpleasant and we tend to push that out of our memory. And so what happens is that's why pain doesn't actually work as that good of a deterrent.
Yeah, and again, I think we're discovering this. I think we're discovering, that you provide incentives, you provide achievable goals, for people, and that will mold their behavior much, much more effectively than threatening that, well, if you don't do this, then these dire consequences are going to happen. Yeah, because like basically punishment evokes fear, and fear kind of like freezes people. It just like it just creates this anxiety that everybody feels. Like so yeah. To the extent we move away from punishment to reward, the world's going to be calmer. The world's going to be much more optimistic, and with far less conflict.
Yeah, I think so. And I really hope people I get it. I mean, it seems to me the very idea of reward and punishment is evidence right there that our behavior is causally influenced. Because here's an interesting thought, George. Now, if rewards and or punishments do cause more or less of a certain behavior, then that shows that our behavior is caused by other things that are not in our control. Because obviously, I think a lot of people, even they may not get that nothing is really in our control, but they may get that other people's judgments about us and the way that they reward and punish us is not up to us, but it does affect our behavior. So that shows that our behavior is caused. And if people try to say that our behavior is uncaused and that we do think that everything is chosen for no reason, well, then reward and punishment are completely useless and have no effect.
Absolutely. And not only does reward and punishment just basically explain causality, it also describes that we are programmed. We're programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain. That's why we respond to reward and punishment. And it's kind of like, for example, like if we created a robot, and we program that robot that every time it goes and it goes moves into a wall. The programming is that this robot is going to make a left turn each time that happens. This left turn is kind of like seeking, pleasure, right? We're the same thing. Would we say that this robot who's programmed to make a left turn each time it reaches a wall or an obstacle has a free will? No, it has to make a left turn. It's not up to it. It's up to its programming, which is not up to the robot. In the same way, we're programmed to seek pleasure and avoid pain, which is why we're programmed to respond to reward and punishment.
Exactly. Our entire basis of reward and punishment assumes determinism. It has to assume that at the very least, all of the decisions that we reward and punish people for are caused, and that we believe we can cause them to do differently in the future by those rewards and punishments. So yeah, I think that everything makes sense under the light of causality.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like, that kind of like just invites the question, and like, how do people not get this? I mean, this is our constant challenge, to kind of like explain it more and more clearly. Sometimes it's a matter of explaining it over and over because a person may not get it the first 5 or 10 times, or maybe by the 20th time they'll get it. And so, yeah, because these concepts are not difficult, but Chandler, that this actually is another way to demonstrate our lack of free will, because so many people are so thoroughly conditioned to believe in free will. Some of them, for example, have been taught when they were 4 years old, listen, if you don't believe what our religion teaches, when you die, you may go to this place where you're going to suffer forever. And one of the things our religion teaches is that we have a free will. Tell that to a 4-year-old, then ask that 4-year-old when the 4-year-old is 20 or 30 years old to deny free will. In the recesses of that person's mind is going to be that memory. Like you said, that we don't tend to remember consciously, but our unconscious will remember it. Of this threat. So I mean, like there've got to be these like real powerfully conditioned explanations for how so many people don't get what we kind of like understand, for what it's not up to us. I guess we were born or developed a kind of like a mind that's much more objective, that isn't kind of like a swayed by our emotions and opinions. But again, this challenge that we have of reaching people that have been so conditioned, this is yet another way of demonstrating why we don't have a free will. These people, we can't expect them to all of a sudden get it, because their conditioning is so ingrained. So this is why what this whole mission we're doing takes time.
Yeah, I mean, and I just think it's so powerful because think about it. People, when they're adults, are still believing things that were taught to them when they were toddlers. And so, in other words, it wasn't their idea to believe these things. This was forced into them, before they knew anything, before they could learn to read or anything. And so they're afraid to believe otherwise because they're afraid of punishment if they don't believe a certain way.
Right, and here's the thing. So like we could use this to advantage, because like one of the things, one source of punishment, one form of punishment is kind of like feeling shame. For example, there's a lot of people in the world who, like, let's say they're at a party or with other people, they wouldn't they wouldn't say that the earth is flat, because people would say, what, are you kidding? Where have you been the last however many years? Or they wouldn't say that the sun revolves around the earth, because they would be ridiculed, right? And for example, like a young kid, a young, boy or girl is taught at a very early age that there's this guy in a red suit that comes down a chimney and gives us all presents, right? All right. So like the kid is now, I don't know when they start getting, learning that it's not the case, but maybe it's 5 or 6 or whatever. Then the older kids, kind of like shame these younger kids into like not believing in Santa Claus anymore. So like what I'm trying to say now is that like this same process of, I guess it's kind of like a punishment in a sense. It's kind of conditioning, through punishment, could be a way where people like are able to then overcome the conditioning, this fear of hell and stuff that they have, and ultimately overcome free will belief. If at parties people like begin to defend free will, and all of a sudden they're kind of like they're butt of jokes. People are kind of like saying, "Huh, how does this person not get it?" This kind of like, it's unfortunate because it's punishment in a sense, but it's a way to counter this very powerful conditioning that they had, when they were very young.
Yeah, and here's what's interesting about it. Now, with most things, whether it's about other beliefs, other things about science or religion, people are, ridiculed for having certain beliefs or opinions. But what's unique about our group, where we all get that nobody has a free will, is that we're not blaming anybody. We're not being mean to someone and saying, "Hey, you stupid person, you believe this and this is wrong." We don't do that. We know it's not up to the person, so we don't mistreat them that way.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's, so and that we're trying to create a world where that's, that's the norm because, a person who believes in free will is not only going to do that, going to like, blame people and want people to suffer. They're going to believe they're doing something right in doing that. And so this just gives you an idea of how profoundly confused and actually insane our world is. I mean, to believe, Nick and I use this on the show sometimes. A person can believe that they're Napoleon, or let's say the reincarnation of Napoleon, and they could be more sane than a person who believes they have a free will. Because they could be, in fact, the reincarnation of Napoleon, but there's absolutely no way that they could ever have a free will.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it is really insane when you think about it. And all we have to do is really get people to start thinking about it because once you start thinking about it and you understand what it's really about and that this isn't about political freedom and this isn't necessarily about whether or not you're doing what you want. It's really about, are you the author of what you want? Are you the author of the causes before your existence that make you do what you do?
Yeah. And another thing that's insane, and this is something we don't get into that much. I think maybe we should, it's a much more complex question, but like, why would the universe or God or whatever is, controlling everything in whatever way, why, you have this like profoundly religious, irrational belief. Why did we believe it in the first place? Why did the universe or this causal process condition us or cause us to like be so completely misguided about the nature of reality?
Yeah, that's the thing about it is that, yeah, I don't know. I guess for me, I that's why I have a hard time imagining that the universe, or God, or whatever being, this conscious thing that would that would even communicate with us. Because if it did communicate with us, why wouldn't it tell everyone a long time ago that nobody has a free will and set the record straight, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, this whole idea. I mean, one thing that and this is one of the challenges we have is that like this whole idea of like a benevolent God, an all good God, just goes completely out the window. Once we understand that nobody has a free will, because like if we're going to blame anyone, like if we do something wrong, it's really not us; it's God making us do it wrong. So that's that becomes a problem for us because like a lot of people like to believe that either God or the universe is benign, is benevolent, is on our side. And I mean, this is interesting because like I kind of like will see the universe in that way because it makes me feel good. But I'll also understand. Hey, wait a minute. Anything that we define as cruel, as evil, as whatever, we have to assign to the universe or God. And and yeah, so like we're stuck concluding that the universe, if we want to be naturalistic, is both good and bad. And then, I guess we can evolve beyond that to some kind of understanding beyond good and bad. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's logical, but it just opens up a wide spectrum of questions and inquiries in terms of what the fundamental nature of our reality is, at least in terms of morality.
Well, that's what I like, George. I like things that open up more questions. It always gives us more to talk about. Yeah. So did we talk about everything in this episode?
I think we got it down. So yeah, basically, just to reiterate briefly, the when we overcome as a world this free will belief, and we will do it, it'll probably be sooner than later. Um, eventually nobody's going to be angry at anyone, including themselves, because like being angry and blaming someone will be completely illogical. It'll be like as illogical as blaming somebody in California for something that happened, on the East Coast or in Canada or something.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah, well, this is great. So should we close this one?
Sounds good.
All right, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs and George Ortega. I think the future looks good, and hopefully sooner rather than later we'll all understand that nobody has a free will and why it matters. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.